Throw another coin. Let's see if this dirty black beggar can catch it like a dog.
Garrett Caldwell whipped a handful of quarters at the old man sitting outside Belmont Crown's gates. His jockey friends howled. Good boy. Now fetch. The old man caught one coin mid-air, didn't flinch, didn't look away.
That killer horse in stall 9.
The one that broke 3 trainers. How many days before they put him down? 10? Garrett stopped laughing.
How do you know about that horse?
The old man didn't answer. He just turned a cracked leather bridle in his hands and smiled. The kind of smile that made Garrett take one step back without knowing why. Behind them, stall 9 shook. Steel screamed. The stallion inside wanted out. This beggar they were spitting on, he was hiding something none of them saw coming. Belmont Crown Estate sat on 600 acres of bluegrass in Lexington, Kentucky. The kind of place where money didn't talk, it whispered, and everyone leaned in to listen. The main drive was lined with white oak trees older than the country itself, leading up to a clubhouse built from Tennessee limestone, with crystal chandeliers in every room and a bourbon bar that served glasses worth more than a working man's weekly paycheck. Oil portraits of Caldwell patriarchs hung along the grand hallway. 4 generations of white men in riding jackets, each one painted with the same thin-lipped smile that said, "We own this. We always will." Out back, past the manicured hedges and the private grandstand with its velvet seats, the stables stretched in long rows of polished oak and wrought iron. 52 stalls. Thoroughbreds worth more than houses. Grooms in clean uniforms moving silently between them, brushing, feeding, whispering to animals that cost more than they'd earn in a lifetime. And then there was the other side. The workers' entrance was around the back, a rusted chain-link gate with a sign that read, "Staff Only." No limestone, no chandeliers, just a gravel path, a punch clock, and a row of lockers that hadn't been painted since the 90s. Most of the grooms were black, most of the jockeys were white. That wasn't written anywhere. It didn't need to be. Garrett Caldwell ran all of it. 38 years old. Platinum blonde hair slicked back, skin permanently sunburned from weekends on his private yacht. He arrived everywhere by helicopter because driving felt beneath him. He wore custom riding boots from a shop in Milan, $6,000 a pair, and he owned 9 pairs. He spoke to his staff the way some men speak to furniture, only when he needed something moved. Garrett was not a great rider. He was not even a good one. But his father had built Belmont Crown into a dynasty, and when the old man died, Garrett inherited everything: the estate, the horses, the name, and the assumption that bloodline was the same thing as talent. He had won races, sure, but he won them the way rich men always win. He bought faster horses, hired better trainers, and when someone got in his way, he buried them. Now he had a problem money couldn't fix. Sovereign fury. The stallion in stall 9 was coal black, 17 hands tall, and built like something God made on a day he was angry. He had kicked through 2 stable walls. He had shattered one trainer's wrist, fractured another's ribs, and sent a third one running off the property without stopping to collect his paycheck. The veterinary team had recommended heavy sedation. 2 of them had quietly recommended euthanasia. Garrett refused. Not out of compassion, but because Sovereign Fury was the fastest horse he had ever owned, and the Belmont Crown Classic was 10 days away. A $2 million purse, television cameras, his dead father's legacy on the line. If the horse couldn't race, Garrett had nothing. And then there was the old man outside the gate, Byron Underwood, 62, black, sitting on that overturned feed bucket for 3 weeks straight. He never begged. He never asked for food. He never spoke to anyone unless spoken to. He just sat there, watching the horses through the iron fence, turning that cracked leather bridle in his hands. Sometimes his lips moved, not to himself, but toward the horses, murmuring, whispering, words no one could hear. The stable hands thought he was crazy. The jockeys thought he was pathetic. Garrett thought he was trash that needed to be swept away. But young Travis Caldwell, Garrett's 19-year-old nephew, a junior jockey with soft hands and scared eyes, noticed something the others didn't. Every time the old man whispered, the nearest horses changed. Their ears turned toward him, their breathing slowed. One mare pressed her nose against the fence, reaching for him, and stood perfectly still until he stopped. Travis mentioned it to his uncle once. Garrett told him to shut up. And in the trophy hall, hanging between two oil portraits of Caldwell champions, there was an old photograph. A young black man holding a leather bridle, standing beside a stallion named Night Psalm. The nameplate beneath the photo had been pried off, scratched clean, like someone wanted the world to forget that man ever existed. Nobody in Belmont Crown talked about that photograph. Not yet. It started as a game. The morning after Sovereign Fury nearly killed his fourth trainer, Garrett was in a foul mood. He stood on the clubhouse terrace with three of his jockey friends, all rich, all bored, all looking for something to laugh at. They found it sitting in the dirt outside the gate. "Watch this," Garrett said. He pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and threw it hard at Byron's chest. It bounced off the old man's jacket and landed in the dust. 1 point. The jockeys laughed. Another one tried, then another. They turned it into a competition. Who could land a coin in the tin cup sitting by Byron's feet? Quarters, dimes, half-dollars ringing against metal and dirt. The stable hand stood nearby, raking gravel, pretending not to see. Byron didn't move, didn't react. Sat like a man made of stone, hands wrapped around that leather bridle, eyes watching the paddock beyond the fence where two mares grazed in the morning light. Garrett upped the stakes. He pulled a $100 bill from his wallet, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it at Byron's face. It hit his cheek and fell into his lap. "Pick it up, boy. That's more than your daddy ever made in a month, if you even had one." Still nothing. Byron looked at the bill, then at Garrett, with an expression so steady, so unbothered, that one of the younger jockeys actually stopped smiling. "Ungrateful, too," Garrett muttered. "Typical." But Garrett wasn't done. Men like him never are. The silence bothered him more than any insult could have. When a man throws everything he has at you and you don't flinch, it makes him feel small. And Garrett Caldwell had spent his entire life making sure he never felt small. He snapped his fingers at two security guards. "Get this trash off my property. I'm tired of smelling him every time I walk to my own stables." The guards grabbed Byron by both arms and hauled him to his feet. The battered satchel fell from his shoulder. It hit the ground and the flap came open, and the old leather bridle spilled out onto the gravel, cracked, weathered, with faded brass buckles turned green from decades of air and sweat and rain. Garrett picked it up. He turned it over in his hands the way a man examines something he's already decided is worthless. He ran his thumb across the noseband where letters were stitched into the leather, but he didn't bother reading them. "You stole this from somebody's barn, didn't you?" He held it up for his friends to see. "Look at this. This bum's been walking around with stolen tack like it means something." He tossed the bridle into a mud puddle. That was the moment. Not the coins, not the insults, not the hands on his arms or the laughter ringing across the courtyard. It was the bridle landing in the mud, the soft splash, the brown water swallowing the stitched inscription that broke something in Byron Underwood's face. His jaw tightened. His eyes, dry and steady all morning, went wet. Not tears, something deeper than tears. The kind of pain that lives in the bones. The guards dragged him past the gate and shoved him onto the road. Garrett turned his back and walked toward the clubhouse, already checking his phone. Nobody saw Travis. The boy had been standing by the feed shed, watching the whole thing with his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. He was 19, underpaid, terrified of his uncle, and carrying the kind of shame that comes from watching cruelty and doing nothing about it. He waited until Garrett disappeared inside. Then he walked to the mud puddle, knelt down, and pulled the bridle out. He wiped the mud off with his sleeve, slowly, carefully, the way you handle something that matters even though you don't yet understand why. And then he saw the inscription on the noseband. 5 words stitched in thread so old it was almost the same color as the leather. Quiet hands, loud heart. Travis stared at it. Something tugged at the back of his mind. A memory, a connection he couldn't quite place. He looked up at the trophy hall windows across the courtyard. Somewhere inside, between the oil portraits and the crystal and the Caldwell name on everything, there was an old photograph of a young black man holding a bridle just like this one. He put it in his jacket and walked away. That same night, in the stable manager's cottage at the edge of the property, Eleanor Nellie Price sat by her window and watched the empty courtyard where the coins still glittered in the dirt. She was 76 years old. She had managed these stables for 41 years. She had seen owners come and go, horses born and buried, and scandals swept under rugs so expensive they could buy a house. She knew exactly who Byron Underwood was. She had known since the first day he appeared outside that gate 3 weeks ago. She recognized the way he sat, still, patient, watchful. She recognized the way his lips moved when the horses passed. And she recognized that bridle, because she had watched him stitch it with his own hands in this very stable 30 years ago for a horse named Night Psalm. She had kept silent because he asked her to. "Not yet, Nellie," he had whispered through the fence one evening. "Not yet." So she waited. And she watched Garrett Caldwell throw coins at the man who built his family's fortune. And she gripped the windowsill until her knuckles ached. And she said nothing. But in her bedroom closet, behind a box of old racing programs, there was a manila envelope she had kept for 3 decades. Inside it, lab reports, internal memos, and a signed confession from a dead veterinarian. She wasn't going to wait much longer. And somewhere on the dark road outside Belmont Crown, Byron Underwood walked alone. No satchel, no bridle, just a man and the night and 30 years of silence sitting on his shoulders like a second skin. Behind him, from deep inside the estate, Sovereign Fury screamed again. The stallion knew something was wrong. He had been screaming every night since Byron arrived. And every night since Byron arrived, nobody had thought to ask why. It happened 2 nights later. Sovereign Fury had been getting worse. He refused food. He paced his stall in circles, slamming his shoulder into the reinforced steel door every few minutes, like a prisoner testing the walls. The night groom quit after the stallion kicked a water trough clean through the stall window, 600 pounds of cast iron flying through the air like it was made of paper. By midnight, every light on the estate was on. Garrett stood 50 yards from stall 9, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the veterinary team argue about dosage. The head vet wanted a heavy tranquilizer, enough to drop the horse for 8 hours. His assistant said the dose could stop the stallion's heart. A third vet, younger, quieter, suggested they call a specialist from Lexington. "No outsiders," Garrett snapped. "Shoot the dart. If he dies, I'll buy another horse." The head vet raised the tranquilizer rifle. Sovereign Fury slammed the door again, and this time the top hinge cracked. One more hit and the stallion would be loose. 1,600 pounds of rage with nowhere to go but through them. Travis was standing behind the feed sheds, shaking. Not from the cold. He had seen what that horse did to the last trainer who got within 10 feet. He had heard the sound of a man's ribs breaking from across the paddock. He did not want to be anywhere near stall 9 tonight. But then he saw something that made him forget all of that. A shadow moving along the east fence. Slow, calm, no flashlight, no hesitation. Just a figure slipping through the gap in the iron rails where the old drainage pipe had rusted out. The gap that nobody had bothered to fix because nobody thought anyone would be crazy enough to use it. Byron Underwood walked across the open yard toward stall 9 like a man walking into his own living room. Travis opened his mouth to shout. Nothing came out. Byron reached the stall door. Sovereign Fury was slamming against the other side, the steel buckling outward with every hit, the sound like a car crash repeating itself every 3 seconds. Byron placed his palm flat against the door. He closed his eyes, and he began to whisper. Nobody could hear the words. Not Travis, not the vet team, not Garrett, who had just noticed the figure by the stall and was screaming for security. The words weren't for any of them. They were for the horse. The slamming stopped. Not gradually, not slowly winding down. It stopped, like someone had pulled a plug. 1 second, the stall was shaking. The next, silence. Absolute, ringing, impossible silence. The head vet lowered the rifle. Byron unlatched the stall door. Every person on that yard held their breath. Travis grabbed the fence rail so hard the rust cut into his palms. The door swung open. Sovereign Fury stood in the middle of the stall. His muscles were still trembling. His coat was dark with sweat. His eyes, wild and white-rimmed 10 seconds ago, were fixed on Byron with something that looked nothing like rage. It looked like recognition. Byron stepped inside. He did not raise his hands. He did not reach for the horse. He angled his body sideways, dropped his left shoulder, and slowed his breathing until his chest barely moved. Every motion was precise, deliberate, ancient. The language of a man who had spent a lifetime learning how to make a 1,200-pound animal feel safe. He whispered again. One sentence, still inaudible. Sovereign Fury lowered his massive head, his knees bent, his front legs folded. And the killer horse, the animal that had broken trainers, destroyed stalls, and terrified every professional on this estate, knelt on the straw floor of stall 9. Byron placed his forehead against the stallion's muzzle. "I know, son," he said softly. "They forgot you too." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The vet's hands were shaking. Travis had tears running down his face and didn't notice. Nellie Price, standing in her cottage doorway 200 yards away, put both hands over her mouth and closed her eyes. And Garrett Caldwell, standing in the floodlit yard with his mouth open and his fists clenched, did not see a miracle. He saw a threat. He turned to his assistant and said very quietly, "Find out who that man is. I want to know everything. Tonight." Garrett's people found nothing. They searched every database they could access. Racing commission records, county arrest files, Social Security lookups, even a private investigator Garrett kept on retainer for business disputes. Byron Underwood didn't exist. No license, no address, no employment history, no criminal record. Nothing. It was as if someone had reached into every filing cabinet in Kentucky and pulled his name out by the roots. That made Garrett angrier than the kneeling horse did. But anger doesn't pay bills. And the Belmont Crown Classic was now 8 days away. Sovereign Fury was the only horse in Garrett's stable fast enough to win. The stallion had calmed down since that night. He ate, he drank, he stood still when the grooms entered, but he would not let anyone ride him. Every time a jockey climbed into the saddle, the horse locked his legs and refused to move. One rider tried using spurs. Sovereign Fury threw him into the wall before the man's second heel kick landed. The horse was waiting for something. Everyone on the estate knew it. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. On the 6th morning before the Classic, Garrett swallowed what was left of his pride and sent Travis to the gate with an offer. Byron was back on his bucket. No one knew how he kept returning, but every time security removed him, he reappeared the next dawn like the tide. Travis delivered the message. Garrett would pay Byron $10,000 to train Sovereign Fury for the race. Cash. No contract, no questions. Byron listened. He looked past Travis at the estate, the white fences, the limestone clubhouse, the stables he had built with his hands and his name before any of it belonged to the Caldwells. "I don't want his money," Byron said. Travis blinked. "Then what do you want?" "After the race, the horse goes free. Sanctuary. Not the auction house, not the glue factory. A real pasture with real grass and nobody putting a whip to him ever again." Travis brought the terms back to Garrett. Garrett laughed, poured himself a bourbon, and said, "Fine, whatever the old man wants. Just get that horse ready." He had no intention of honoring a single word. Byron entered Belmont Crown Estate through the front gate for the first time in 30 years. Nellie was waiting by the stable entrance. Their eyes met. She opened her mouth. He shook his head. Just barely. A movement so small only someone who had known him for decades would catch it. Not yet. She handed him a set of stable keys and walked away without a word. The training began the next morning, and it was like nothing anyone on that estate had ever seen. Byron did not use a whip. He did not use spurs. He did not raise his voice above a murmur. He walked into Sovereign Fury's stall carrying only the old leather bridle, and instead of forcing it onto the horse's head, he hung it on a hook by the door and sat down in the straw. He sat there for 2 hours. The stallion watched him, paced, snorted, came closer, backed away, came closer again. At the end of the second hour, Sovereign Fury lowered his nose and sniffed Byron's open palm. Byron breathed out slowly, matching the horse's rhythm, inhale for inhale, until the two of them were breathing as one. Then he stood, picked up the bridle, and Sovereign Fury dropped his head to accept it like he had been wearing it his whole life. The groom standing outside the stall didn't say a word. One of them, a black man in his 50s who had worked the stables for 20 years, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and turned away. By the third day, Byron had Sovereign Fury on the training track. No saddle, no rider, just voice commands. He walked the stallion through the full circuit, including the Devil's Stretch, a dangerously steep section of track that curved downhill at an angle that made most horses panic. Sovereign Fury took it at a canter, ears forward, responding to nothing but the sound of Byron's voice from the rail. The jockeys watched from the grandstand in silence. On the fourth day, Byron found something the entire veterinary team had missed. He was running his hands along Sovereign Fury's left foreleg, slowly, the way a blind man reads a page, when his fingers stopped. He pressed. The horse flinched. Not much, just a twitch. But Byron's face changed. "Hairline fracture," he said to the head vet who had come to observe. "Left cannon bone, about 2 inches above the fetlock." The vet stared at him. "We x-rayed that leg 3 weeks ago. It was clean." "X-ray it again." They did. The fracture was there. A crack so thin it barely showed on the screen, but real enough to end the horse's career if he ran on it at full speed. Byron fashioned a therapeutic wrap from stable cloth, pine resin, and a binding technique he had invented decades ago. The vet watched him work and didn't say a word, because there was nothing to say. The man's hands knew things that machines didn't. But while Byron was building trust in the stable, Garrett was building something else. He changed the locks on the stable door so Byron couldn't enter at night. He told the grooms that Byron was a con artist who had drugged the horse with something hidden in the bridle leather, a lie so stupid that nobody believed it, but nobody challenged it either, because Garrett signed their paychecks. He cornered Travis in the tack room. "I see you following that old man around like a lost puppy. Let me make this real clear, nephew. If I catch you helping him one more time, you're off this estate. Out of the will, out of the family. You'll be just as homeless as he is." Travis looked at the floor. He nodded. He said, "Yes, sir." And then that night, after Garrett went to bed, Travis walked to the archive room at the back of the trophy hall. The room nobody entered because it was full of dust and boxes and things the Caldwell family preferred to forget. Nellie had slipped him a key that afternoon without a word. He opened the door, turned on the light, and in a box labeled 1989 to 1995, "Do not open," he found it. The original photograph, undefaced, unscratched. A young black man in his early 30s, standing tall beside a magnificent stallion named Night Psalm, holding a leather bridle with green brass buckles and an inscription on the noseband. Beneath the photograph, a brass nameplate that read, "Byron Underwood, the Quiet Hand, Trainer of Champions." Travis held the photograph in both hands. His own last name was on every building in this estate. But the man who made it all possible had been erased so completely that even the photograph was buried in a box someone had labeled, "Do not open." He put the photo inside his jacket, right next to the bridle he had pulled from the mud. And for the first time in his life, Travis Caldwell felt ashamed of his own name. Travis found Byron at dawn, sitting on a hay bale behind the east stable, watching Sovereign Fury graze in the morning paddock. The stallion moved differently now. No pacing, no wall kicking, no wild eyes. He walked with his head low, tearing grass in slow, even pulls, like an animal that had finally remembered what peace felt like. Travis didn't say good morning. He pulled the photograph from inside his jacket and held it in front of Byron's face. "This is you." Byron looked at the photograph for a long time. His own face, 30 years younger, staring back at him from beside a horse that had been dead for 2 decades. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just exhaled, the kind of breath a man releases when he's been holding something inside for so long that letting it go feels like surgery. "That was a different life," Byron said. "You're the quiet hand." Travis's voice was shaking. "You trained Night Psalm. You trained half the champions in this stable's history. I looked it up. There are records in that archive going back to 1986. Your name is on everything. Training logs, breeding plans, race strategies, all of it. And then after 1994, nothing. Like someone went through every page with a razor blade and cut you out." Byron nodded slowly. "That's about right." "What happened?" Byron didn't answer immediately. He watched Sovereign Fury pull at the grass. He watched the sunlight move across the paddock. And then he told Travis the story he had never told anyone. Because until now, there had been no one left worth telling. In 1986, a young Byron Underwood arrived at Belmont Crown with nothing but a gift he couldn't explain and a way with horses that made grown men stop and stare. Old man Caldwell, Garrett's father, Harold, hired him as a groom. Within a year, Byron was training colts. Within 3, he was the most talked-about horseman in Kentucky. They called him the Quiet Hand because he never raised his voice, never used a crop, never forced an animal to do anything. He asked, and the horses answered. Night Psalm was his masterpiece, a sickly foal that every vet on the estate said should be put down. Bad lungs, weak joints, wouldn't survive its first winter. Byron took the foal into his own quarters, slept beside him on the straw floor for 3 months, and nursed him into a stallion that went on to win 9 consecutive stakes races. He stitched the leather bridle himself, fitted it to Night Psalm's head with his own hands, and carved the inscription into the noseband with a pocket knife. Quiet hands, loud heart. The Caldwell name went national on the back of that horse. The money came. The fame came. The television contracts, the sponsorship deals, the magazine covers. All of it built on the partnership between Byron Underwood and the animals he loved. And then Harold Caldwell decided he didn't want to share credit with a black man. The night before Night Psalm's 10th championship race, someone planted a vial of prohibited stimulant in Byron's locker. Harold called the racing commission himself. The hearing lasted less than an hour. Byron had no lawyer, couldn't afford one. Harold had 4. The commission revoked Byron's license on the spot. No appeal, no investigation, no second chance. "When you're a black man against money like that," Byron said quietly, "the truth doesn't set you free, it just makes the cage quieter." He lost his license, then his cottage on the estate, then his savings fighting a legal battle no one would take, then his wife, then his daughter, who was 3 years old the last time he held her. Travis was crying. He didn't wipe his face, he just stood there, holding the photograph of a man the world had erased, and cried like a boy who had just learned that the house he grew up in was built on someone else's bones. "Why did you come back?" Travis asked. Byron looked at Sovereign Fury. The stallion had stopped grazing and was standing still, watching them both. Night Psalm's grandson, the same dark coat, the same deep eyes. "Because they were going to kill him," Byron said, "and he's the last thing left in this world that carries my work inside his blood." Travis looked at the photograph, then at Byron, then at the horse. "Garrett is going to find out who you are," Travis said. "His people are digging." "I know." "He'll destroy you again. He'll do what his father did." Byron smiled, that same quiet, unsettling smile from the gate. "His father had the element of surprise. Your uncle doesn't." Before Travis could answer, a voice cut across the yard like a blade. "What the hell are you two talking about?" Garrett was standing at the stable entrance. Behind him, 2 men in dark suits, The kind of men who carry briefcases instead of weapons but do the same kind of damage. He was looking at the photograph in Travis's hand. The confrontation in the clubhouse happened fast and ugly. Garrett snatched the photograph from Travis's hand, looked at it for 3 seconds, and then looked at Byron with the expression of a man who had just found a cockroach in his bourbon. "So the beggar has a name," he said. "Byron Underwood, the Quiet Hand." He said it like it was a joke. "My father told me about you, a stable boy who got too big for his britches and had to be put back in his place." Byron said nothing. Garrett held up the photograph for the room to see. 6 guests, 4 sponsors, 2 racing officials who had come for a pre-classic inspection. "Ladies and gentlemen, our horse trainer is a convicted cheat, banned from racing for doping a horse in 1994. My father caught him personally." The room went quiet. The sponsors exchanged glances. One of the racing officials reached for his phone. Then a voice came from the back of the room. "That's a lie, Garrett, and you know it." Nellie Price stepped through the doorway. 76 years old, white hair pulled back, hands steady, eyes absolutely murderous. She was carrying a manila envelope, the same one she had kept in her bedroom closet for 30 years, behind a box of old racing programs, waiting for a moment exactly like this. She walked to the center of the room and opened it. "These are the original lab reports from Night Psalm's final race. Clean, every single one." She laid the papers on the table one by one. "These are internal memos from Harold Caldwell to the head veterinarian, dated 2 weeks before the race, instructing him to plant a vial of clenbuterol in Byron's locker." Another page. "And this," she placed the final document down like a woman laying a gravestone, "is a signed, notarized confession from Dr. William Hatch, the veterinarian who did it. He signed this on his deathbed in 2019. He couldn't die with it on his conscience." The room didn't just go quiet, it went airless. The kind of silence where you can hear the ice melting in someone's glass across the table. Garrett's face changed. The sneer collapsed. His sunburned skin went pale, then blotchy red. "Those are fabricated. That old woman has been—" "Sit down, Garrett." The older racing official said it calmly, but it wasn't a suggestion. One of the sponsors pulled out his phone and started making a call. A second sponsor stood up and left the room without saying a word. Travis stood in the corner, shaking, watching his uncle's empire crack down the middle in real time. But Garrett Caldwell was not a man who surrendered. He was a man who escalated. That night, 5 days before the Classic, Garrett made his move. At 2 in the morning, 3 men in work clothes walked onto the Devil's Stretch carrying tools. They loosened 4 rail posts on the inside of the sharpest curve, the section where horses ran at full speed downhill on a banking turn. The posts looked normal from the outside. But one hard impact and they would collapse outward, sending any horse on the inside rail straight through the gap and down a 6-foot embankment onto concrete drainage below. Garrett entered a second horse in the Classic, Sterling Blaze, a decent but unremarkable bay gelding, and hired a jockey named Cole Whitfield who owed him money and didn't ask questions. Cole's instructions were simple. Stay on the outside at Devil's Stretch. Let whoever was on the inside hit the rail. Sovereign Fury was meant to die on that track, and if Byron's training was what put the horse there, then Byron would take the blame. The morning of the race, Byron walked the track alone at dawn. He did this every race day, a habit from 30 years of training, checking the footing, reading the dirt the way a sailor reads the water. When he reached the Devil's Stretch, he stopped, knelt, ran his fingers across the base of a rail post. The ground was disturbed. Fresh tool marks in the dirt. The post moved when he pushed it, barely, but enough. He checked the next 3 posts. Same thing, all loose, all on the inside rail, all at the exact point where a horse running in the lead would be hugging the curve at maximum speed. Byron stood up. He looked back toward the estate where the grandstand was already being decorated with bunting and the catering trucks were lining up. 20,000 people would fill those seats today. Television cameras, families, children. He walked to Nellie's cottage and told her 2 things. Make sure every security camera on the property was recording and point one directly at the Devil's Stretch. Then he went to find Travis. The boy was in the Jockeys' changing room, already in his racing silks, green and gold, the Caldwell colors, staring at himself in the mirror like he was looking at a stranger. This was his first major race. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't buckle his helmet. Byron sat down beside him. He didn't give a speech. He didn't say, "You can do this," or "Believe in yourself," or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to offer. He took the helmet from Travis's hands, buckled it himself, and said one thing. "When you hit the bend at Devil's Stretch, do not follow the rail. Go wide. No matter what the other riders do, no matter what your uncle told you, you go wide." Travis looked at him. "Why?" "Because I'm asking you to trust me. That's all I've got." Travis nodded. He stopped shaking. The gates opened at noon. 20,000 spectators filled the grandstand. Television cameras lined the rail. The bourbon was flowing in the VIP boxes, and the sun was high and bright, and the bluegrass smelled like money and summer, and the kind of tradition that only exists when everyone agrees not to look too closely at how it started. 8 horses lined up in the starting gate. Sovereign Fury stood in gate 4, calm, focused, his dark coat gleaming, Travis steady in the saddle. Sterling Blaze stood in gate 6, Cole Whitfield sitting low with his eyes already measuring the first turn. The bell rang, the gates flew open, and 16,000 pounds of thoroughbred muscle exploded onto the track. Sovereign Fury broke clean and fast. By the first turn, he was in second. By the back straight, Travis had him in the lead, the horse running with a power and rhythm that made the commentators stumble over their words. This was not the killer horse from stall 9. This was something else entirely, something beautiful. Sterling Blaze sat in third, waiting. They hit the Devil's Stretch. The track dropped downhill, banking hard to the left. The natural racing line, the fastest line, was tight against the inside rail. Every instinct, every hour of training, every jockey in the field pulled toward that rail. Travis heard Byron's voice in his head. "Go wide." He pulled Sovereign Fury 3 lanes out from the rail. It cost him half a length. The crowd groaned. The commentators questioned the move. Behind him, Sterling Blaze moved to the outside too. Cole Whitfield knew exactly where the danger was. But the 2 horses behind them didn't know. The first horse hit the loosened rail at 40 miles an hour. The post snapped outward. The horse's front legs caught the gap and he stumbled, pitching forward, throwing his rider over his neck and into the dirt. The second horse swerved to avoid the wreckage and clipped the next post. Another collapse, another scream, another body tumbling across the track. The crowd went silent. Then the screaming started. Medics sprinted onto the track. An ambulance siren cut through the air. But the race did not stop. The steward's flag stayed down. 4 horses were still running. Sterling Blaze surged forward. Cole Whitfield rode hard and dirty, cutting inside Travis's line on the final turn, forcing Sovereign Fury toward the inner rail where one more loosened post waited. Travis panicked. He pulled the reins left, then right, unsure, losing rhythm. Sovereign Fury felt the confusion and began to fight, tossing his head, shortening his stride, the wildness creeping back into his eyes. In the grandstand, Byron gripped the rail with both hands. He closed his eyes, and he whispered. 200 yards away, at a full gallop, surrounded by the thunder of hooves and the roar of 20,000 voices, Sovereign Fury's ears turned. The horse heard him. His stride steadied. His head dropped. The wildness drained from his eyes like water through sand. Travis felt the change beneath him, a settling, a certainty, and he understood. He let go of the reins. He stopped fighting. He trusted the horse. Sovereign Fury surged. 3 strides and he was level with Sterling Blaze. 5 strides and he was a neck ahead. Cole Whitfield whipped hard, desperate, his horse giving everything. But Sovereign Fury had something no whip could produce. He had 30 years of a dead man's legacy running through his bloodline and a living man's whisper running through his ears. He crossed the finish line 4 lengths clear. The grandstand erupted. 20,000 people on their feet. Travis was screaming, crying, standing in the stirrups with his fist in the air. The commentators were shouting words like historic and extraordinary and the greatest upset this track has ever seen. But the real moment came 60 seconds later. Track officials, tipped off by Byron before the race, descended on the Devil's Stretch with inspectors and cameras. They found 4 loosened rail posts. They pulled the security footage Nellie had arranged. Clear, time-stamped video of Garrett's men on the track at 2 a.m. with wrenches and crowbars. Garrett was standing in the winner's circle when 2 Racing Commission officers walked toward him. His smile vanished. His eyes darted left, then right, looking for an exit that didn't exist. And at the edge of the winner's circle, behind the rope, Sovereign Fury walked to the fence and pushed his muzzle through the gap toward Byron. The old man placed his forehead against the stallion's face, the same gesture from that first night in stall 9, and closed his eyes. The crowd didn't know who he was, not yet. But they saw the horse choose him. They saw the killer stallion press his face against this old man in a threadbare jacket and stand perfectly, absolutely still. And then someone in the grandstand started clapping. 1 person, then 10, then 100, then 20,000 people on their feet, clapping for a moment they didn't fully understand but could feel in their chests, like a second heartbeat. Byron didn't open his eyes. He just whispered, "We did it, son. We're almost home." They arrested Garrett Caldwell in front of the cameras, not behind closed doors, not quietly in a back office with lawyers and handshakes and deals made over bourbon. Right there in the winner's circle, with 20,000 people watching and every television lens on the property pointed at his face. 2 Racing Commission officers walked him past the grandstand while his sponsors turned their backs and his jockey friends suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. The charges came fast: track tampering, animal endangerment, conspiracy to cause bodily harm, fraud. The loosened rail posts alone carried criminal liability. 2 jockeys had been thrown at Devil's Stretch, one with a broken collarbone, another with a shattered pelvis. Those men had families. They had come to ride a clean race. Garrett had turned the track into a trap. His racing license was revoked before sunset. The same commission, the same process, the same single-page ruling that had destroyed Byron Underwood 30 years ago. Only this time, the evidence was real. Nellie's documents did the rest. The original lab reports, Harold Caldwell's internal memos, Dr. Hatch's deathbed confession. The Racing Commission opened a formal review of Byron's 1994 case, and within 72 hours, they issued a statement that read like an apology the sport was 3 decades too late in making. The charges against Byron Underwood are hereby vacated. His record is fully restored. The commission recognizes a grave miscarriage of justice. The nameplate beneath the photograph in the trophy hall was replaced. Not quietly, not by some maintenance worker at midnight. Travis did it himself, in broad daylight, with Nellie standing beside him. He screwed the brass plate into the wall with his own hands. Byron Underwood, the quiet hand, trainer of champions. This time, no one would pry it off. That evening, Travis stood in front of a press microphone with the $2 million winner's check in his hand. The money belonged to the Caldwell estate. The victory did not. He said only one sentence, and it was the only sentence that mattered. "Everything I did today, I did because a man named Byron Underwood taught me what this horse already knew, that trust is louder than force." Byron turned down every offer they gave him. Head trainer at Belmont Crown, declined. Consulting contract with the Racing Commission, declined. 3 separate stables in Kentucky, Virginia, and Maryland called within a week, offering salaries that would have made most men choke on their coffee. Byron listened politely to each one, thanked them, and said no. He wanted one thing. He had always wanted one thing. 2 weeks after the Classic, a horse trailer pulled up to the gates of Belmont Crown Estate at 6 in the morning. Byron was waiting. Sovereign Fury walked out of stall 9 for the last time, crossed the yard where coins had once been thrown at the man now holding his lead rope, and stepped into the trailer without hesitation. No sedation, no blindfold, no restraint. He followed Byron the way he had followed his voice from the very first night, completely, without question. They drove 4 hours east to a 300-acre equine sanctuary in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Rolling green hills, white birch fences, a creek that ran cold and clear through the middle of the property. No starting gates, no whips, no races. Just grass and silence and room to run for the sake of running. The sanctuary director met them at the entrance. She had already named the new training program the Quiet Hand Method. Byron would visit every week to work with rescued horses, animals that had been abused, neglected, or broken by industries that saw them as products instead of living things. He asked for no salary. He asked for no title. He asked only that the horses be treated the way he had always treated them, with patience, with voice, with time. Nellie Price retired the following month. 41 years at Belmont Crown, and she walked out the same staff gate she had walked in through as a 35-year-old woman who loved horses more than politics. The estate gave her a formal commendation, a framed certificate with gold lettering that she hung in her bathroom because, she said, that's about how much their gratitude is worth. But she didn't leave bitter. She left satisfied. The envelope had done what it was meant to do. The truth had outlasted the men who buried it. Travis Caldwell left the estate a week after his Aunt Nellie. He renounced no inheritance. There wasn't much left to renounce. Garrett's legal fees, the commission fines, and the sponsor withdrawals had gutted the Caldwell fortune faster than anyone expected. The estate was placed under independent oversight. The name stayed on the buildings, but the power behind it was gone. Travis enrolled in a trainer apprenticeship program that Byron helped design, a 12-month course for young horsemen and horsewomen funded by a coalition of racing reform advocates who had waited decades for someone like Byron to say yes. Travis was its first student. Garrett Caldwell's trial made national news. The track tampering was only the beginning. Investigators uncovered decades of exploitation buried in the estate's records. Underpaid black stable workers, suppressed injury reports, falsified breeding documents, and a pattern of racial discrimination so consistent it could have been written into the bylaws. Garrett received a 5-year ban from all equestrian activities and faced criminal prosecution that his lawyers said could take years. He had no comment. A documentary crew arrived at the sanctuary in Virginia 3 months later. They filmed Byron walking through the meadow at dawn with Sovereign Fury beside him. No bridle, no lead rope, no reins. Just a man and a horse, side by side, moving through the morning mist like two old friends who had finally found their way back to each other. The working title of the film was simple: Quiet Hands, Loud Heart. The final shot: Byron's hand resting on Sovereign Fury's neck, the horse's breath rising in the cold air, the mountains behind them, green and endless. And for the first time in 30 years, Byron Underwood looked like a man who was home. They threw coins at him. Let that sit for a moment. They threw coins at a man who had built their empire with his bare hands. They called him a beggar, a thief, a dog. They told him to crawl. They told him to fetch. They looked at his skin and decided that was all they needed to know. And they were wrong. The world is full of Byron Underwoods. Men and women sitting outside the gates of kingdoms they helped build, watching strangers take credit for their work, their genius, their sacrifice. We pass them on sidewalks. We pass them in hallways. We look at what they wear, where they sleep, the color of their skin, and we decide in half a second that we know their whole story. We don't. Talent doesn't disappear because someone powerful decides it shouldn't exist. Genius doesn't expire because it's wrapped in a threadbare jacket. The measure of a person has never been where they sit. It's what they know, what they've built, and how they endure when the world tries to unmake them. Byron Underwood endured 30 years. 30 years of silence, of erasure, of watching his life's work claimed by men who couldn't tell a bridle from a belt. And when the moment came, when the horse screamed and the trainers ran and the money men stood helpless, he didn't ask for revenge. He didn't ask for credit. He walked into that stall and whispered, because that's what he was born to do. And the killer horse knelt.
They threw cards at him, called him a beggar, a dog, and the whole time he was the man who built everything they had. Byron Underwood lost everything because one powerful man decided a black man didn't deserve credit. His name erased, his photograph buried in a box labeled "Do Not Open." His license, his home, his family gone. 30 years, that's how long he waited. And when he came back, he didn't come back for revenge. He came back because a horse was going to die. The last living thing that carried his work inside its blood. He walked into that store, he whispered, and a 1,600-pound killer horse knelt. No one gave Byron his gifts, and no one could take it away. Not money, not power, not 30 years of silence. Talent like that doesn't expire. It just waits for the moment it's needed most. And that's what stays with me. How many people are there right now, sitting outside the gates of something they built, erased and invincible? This story reminded me the truth doesn't disappear, it just waits, and it always wins. Drop it in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't bother to learn who you really are? If this moved you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it, because your worth was never decided by people throwing cards.